Welcome to Shift Change Cares, where we explore the heart behind healthcare. On this podcast, we sit down with the diverse voices making healthcare better. We'll explore what inspired our guests to contribute to this field, and we'll discuss the mentors who shaped their journey, the challenges they've overcome, and how their work is improving patient care and supporting those who deliver it. So join us as we celebrate the people behind the care, one story at a time. Welcome to Shift Change Cares podcast. I'm your host, Morgan Kircher, and I couldn't be more excited to welcome Sarah Boes to the conversation today. Sarah brings a unique perspective to being both a nurse practitioner and an entrepreneur who has turned some of her personal challenges and history into her professional strengths. Her journey from inspired nursing student to successful business founder is a testament to her resilience and her vision. And perhaps most compelling is how Sarah's roles as a healthcare provider and a patient advocate converged when her daughter was born with some health challenges. And we'll explore that a little bit more and how that's taken her advocacy from hospital hallways to Congress. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So throughout Sarah's career, she's consistently transformed her obstacles into opportunities. And I'm eager to explore that with her today. So Sarah, welcome to Shift Change Cares. We're honored to have you as our guest.
Yeah, I definitely have taken a very non-traditional nursing path. So I love to share about it because I like to break the box on what's possible for people because I feel like this degree is so limitless. So thank you so much for having me.
That's absolutely great. Well, we'll just open the door. It's just a friendly conversation to tell us a little bit more. Obviously, I gave some teasers on some of your background here, but tell our audience and listeners a little more about what brought you into healthcare and kind of your journey.
Yeah,
some highlights
absolutely.
of your journey.
So I actually grew up in really rural Eastern Kentucky, and that detail is important because one of the most important people to me in my life was my mama. My mama was diagnosed with lung cancer when I was a teenager. And because we lived in rural Eastern Kentucky, she actually had to travel for her diagnosis. And so we traveled about 2 hours away together. I spent a couple of weeks over one summer in the hospital with her as we found out that she had stage 4 lung cancer and kind of what the plan was, and started her initial round of treatments to then go back home because obviously she was considered a terminal diagnosis. But for me, that was really my first introduction into healthcare. And I really was just like so touched and genuinely so inspired by the oncology nurses that took care of not only her, but me as well. Like some of my night shift nurses used to like stay up and play games with me. They sneak me ice cream and smoothies, it's an oncology unit, like all the things, right? And so it painted this really nice vision for me of what my future could look like. But I felt like I always had this tug of war going on in my brain, because I really wanted to teach, but I was really touched by these nurses, and both of my parents were teachers. And so when it came time for me to go to college, they were like, you can absolutely not become a teacher. They were like, hard left turn on that
Permission
one.
Literally.
Yes, literally be anything else other than be a teacher, which is fine. And, there's a lot of bureaucracy and politics and other layers involved in teaching that you don't really see from the outside. And so I was like, well, next best thing, I'll be a nurse. And I sailed through the first couple of years, the prereqs, getting into the program, the first year of nursing school. And so I was halfway through my program before I ever struggled with school. And that was really incredibly difficult for me because I had always been a top-notch student. And I'm like, why in the world can I not figure this out right now? But for anyone who has been in the dreaded med-surg semester, you know what that is like, and that is a weed-out course, and that's a figure-yourself-out course. And I really hate that it comes halfway through the program, because at that point, I'm like, really don't even feel like you have a lot of options to do
You're
something
invested.
different anyways. You're very invested. So that being said, I failed my first med-surg exam by one question, which was very painful. And then I had an experience about halfway through my clinical that semester where my instructor asked to do a skill with me, which was IV push, but it was something I hadn't done before. And it was something that we were supposed to just like see pop up in clinical. And we kind of had this really abrasive and aggressive interaction with one another. And for someone who is like so type A, which I am, and wants to do everything correctly and do all the things that you're supposed to do, being yelled at by an instructor just kind of like sent me off the edge, especially because I was like, for me, I didn't want to do the skill wrong and harm the patient. So there was all these like safety concerns coming into play and all this anxiety. And I had always had panic attacks, but I didn't have them publicly. And so during that clinical, I had my first public panic attack, which was demoralizing and humiliating. And then I got to the end of that clinical day and I was just asked to leave my program altogether. And they basically were like, we have a lot of concerns that you're just going to be too anxious to be a safe nurse. And for me, I couldn't see it in the moment. Hindsight is always 2020. But it was one of the most pivotal moments of my entire life to be asked to leave and to be told that I was too anxious to do something because I'd always had anxiety. I mean, I've literally been in therapy since I was 12. I've always been anxious about something.
Sure.
But to be told that I couldn't do something and I wouldn't be able to do something because of that just like broke down my whole world. I was like, what does my future look like? Can I keep being this anxious and be okay and show up in the world and all the things? But as you just said a moment ago, I was very invested halfway through nursing school.
Sure.
And so I felt like I had to push through and see if I could pass the class anyways. And I was kind of in a really precarious spot because they worked on the 3-strike system. And so I got a strike for not knowing how to do the skill, even though they had never taught it. And I got a strike for having a panic attack. So I only had one more strike available to me, which by the way, I'd never had a strike in my life in anything. Super high pressure,
That's a
super high
blow.
stakes.
Yeah,
It was a big blow.
That's an ego blow and everything.
It's
Absolutely.
a whole life blow. But all that being said, I passed the class with a B. I was very, very excited about that. I made it through. And when I got to my senior year of nursing school, I actually started tutoring people in that class because like halfway through, like I really figured out how to take the test and how they were writing the questions and test taking strategies. And what had happened to me during that first exam that I couldn't articulate was I was like literally panicking. Like I opened up the first couple of questions, they looked like gibberish, all the things. And so once I figured out how to kind of overcome that anxiety and really believe in myself that I could do this thing, then it was easy to show other students how to do that because nursing students, especially at the school I went to, which is like top 5% of the nation, like it's not that they're not putting in the work to know the content. A lot of it is just overcoming that anxiety and kind of all this anticipation around taking these exams and those sorts of things. But that kind of led me down this really beautiful path after I started tutoring because, I love teaching, love nursing. How do you merge the two together?
Right. I saw the thread. Starting to come
all
together.
Comes together. Yes. And so I decided right after I graduated nursing school, I was immediately going to go back and get my master's in nursing education. And so I did that. And I was like, all right, like gearing up, ready to teach. I'm like 22 years old, 23 maybe at this point. I graduated nursing school when I was 21. And my employer at the time announced that they were going to stop paying for people to go to school. And I was like, well, I don't really have a desire to be a nurse practitioner, but if I ever want to do it, like I should just go ahead and take this opportunity for it to be paid for. And that was how I ended up getting my postmaster's to be a family nurse practitioner, which is what evolved into one day my business of Sarah Michelle NP Reviews. So for me, it's like super fun to talk about my business and my life and what I've been able to create outside of the bedside because it really came from that like one moment of anxiety and not believing in myself and not being sure that I could do it. And then I kind of accidentally created a business showing people that they could do just that, which is really, really cool.
That is really cool. So tell us a little bit about what your business became.
Yeah, so I fortunately, unfortunately, I graduated nurse practitioner school during COVID, and it was chaos in every sense of the word. So to just give you a little bit of perspective, all the exams were canceled overnight. You never knew when you were actually going to take the test. Everybody was shut inside, at least in Kentucky. So like all the in-person review conferences, everything was just moved online unexpectedly. And actually, as I was finishing up nurse practitioner school, I started teaching nursing clinicals and labs. So we also transitioned those online overnight, which was a great experience for me because it gave me an opportunity to really like play around with what does teaching online look like, what hits, what doesn't, all the things. And so
I don't mean to interrupt, but you've had moments that help you learn exactly how to do the teaching moments that you needed for this.
It's so perfect. Like I am, it's hard to equate things to luck, but I do think there's like a beautiful synergy with that invisible string that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like woven itself throughout my life. So in March and April 2020, I was teaching nursing students online, helping them figure that out. I mean, we were literally putting catheters in the water bottles on Zoom. Like that was the world that we were in. And then I finally got to take my nurse practitioner exam in May of that year after having it rescheduled literally 5 times. Like show up to the testing center's closed. You don't even know it until you get there, which is so much anticipation and anxiety. But finally took the darn exam, and it was 175 questions. I finished it in less than an hour, and I was like, oh my God, I just spent months, like my hair is falling out. I broke a tooth during that time. I'm grinding my teeth so hard. I was like so anxious about taking this exam because it's so high stakes. Like if you don't pass, you never get to use that degree, right? Like that's really heavy to sit with, especially with all the uncertainty of COVID times two, just in general.
Right.
But I was like, wow, I really I wasted so much energy on this. And I genuinely believe like if you can graduate nurse practitioner school, you can pass this exam. And so on Memorial Day weekend, I decided, well, actually, like the second I walked out of the exam, I was like, I could do this review course thing better because I'd already been teaching on Zoom, right? I was like, I feel like I could just do this a little differently, a little bit better.
You
So
have
I'm
the
like sitting in
skills
the,
now, right? And you know
yeah, I
what
have
to
the
expect and
skills.
you can pass along your
Yeah.
knowledge.
Exactly. And me and my friend tested together, which was fun. And so I was waiting for her to come out, and I just kept like thinking about that. I was like, what would it be like if I create a review? Like, what would I want to see? Those sorts of things. And then by that weekend, I was like, I just have to do it. Like, I'm just going to throw it together this weekend. I'll give it to my classmates for free. There were like 30 of us. And I'm going to create a Facebook group for us all to live in. And the agreement is I'll give you this review for free if you'll invite somebody in my Facebook group. And so I ended up giving to the first 100 people for free. And it was this little 3-hour course that is recorded on Zoom. And what made it different, well, a couple of things made it different, but one, it was kind of a ask and recall kind of setting. So instead of me being like, blood pressure is 120/80 or whatever, I'd be like, this patient came in, this is what we're looking at. What do you think the blood pressure parameters are? So even though like it wasn't live, you could like see at home, did I know it? Did I not? Because that builds up your confidence too. And the other layer of it was just those simple test taking strategies that I tutored 1,000 times of like, if two answers are opposites, it's like one of those answers. And so that was kind of incorporated in there too. And I went to sell it for the first time ever. And I sold it for $15. And I made $1,000 in a day. And it lights me up every time I tell that story because it really can be that simple. That's why I love to tell that story. Like you can throw something together over a weekend, start up a Facebook group, and then start selling it on Venmo through Facebook Messenger. And I made $1,000 in a day. Like I didn't used to make $1,000 in a week. So for me, it was this really beautiful, mind-bending moment of like, what would mine and my husband's lives look like if we made $1,000 every day? And it was really cool for me to create something so impact-driven.
Mm-hmm.
And really kind of like mission driven because it was so much more than just test prep. Like people like hear board prep and they kind of have this like very stoic view of it.
Right.
But I'm like, no, like I was helping people believe in themselves so they could go take this exam. There was a student that I worked with really early on who had failed her exam over 2 decades ago. And she had never had that courage to take it again, but she did our courses and she was able to take it again and pass.
That's amazing.
All this time that she could have been using that degree, but she really just had to believe in herself to be able to do that. But my business kind of became a rocket ship really quickly. And I'm very grateful for that because it was started kind of as a 3-hour Zoom course, pivoted into like 25 hours of recorded courses, a question bank, a 6-week live program, all these things I created that were so fun and really just kind of out of my own needs from board prep. And then as I was kind of riding that rocket ship, I was like, well, I had to really like take a step back because it was growing so fast of like, do I want this to be my entire life? And do I want to build like a Kaplan and have medical portions and legal portions and GME and ACT and all the things? And for me, like that wasn't really in my definition of success and what I was hoping to do. And so I thought I would rather have the win for myself and my family. And honestly, to my students, a lot of selling my business came from I didn't have the software that I needed. Like I needed custom software.
Mm.
And there were a couple of other pieces like that I felt like I was bottlenecking the business. And so I started looking to sell, and I actually found out I was pregnant the first day that we like went to look at the market and talk to a
Right.
banker and a broker about even selling. So I also like to make the point that I did not sell because I was pregnant. But I ended up selling my business when I was 8.5 months pregnant, because doing a deal takes a long time and a lot of talking to different people and all the
Right.
pieces.
Understood.
But for 5 years ago, right now, I hadn't even started my business yet, to 2 years in selling it, and then kind of watching how our family's lives have evolved. I sold my business 8.5 months pregnant, and then just a couple of short weeks later, we found out that what we thought was a normal, healthy baby would be our beautiful daughter, Meadow, and she would have 4 different heart defects. And so that kind of took a twist and turn on my life. And really, I feel like when you become a mom, you're so like permanently altered anyways, but becoming a heart mom has definitely changed my life and changed my priorities. And I used to be kind of like shamed in owning that, because, when you're a female founder, you don't be like, well, I became a mom and everything is different. But like, I became a heart mom. Genuinely, everything is different. And
Absolutely,
kind
it
of
is. Sure.
what I want to do with my life now looks different too because of that.
Your timeline is just incredible to me, that the
Wild.
challenges that you hit created something that spoke to you for, out of necessity and need. Necessity is
Yeah.
the mother of all invention, right? You came up with
Uh-huh.
this tool that now helps all these other people, but then your timeline to give you the freedom and flexibility to be where now you needed to be, like right on
Oh my
time. I
goodness.
think that's
I'm so
beautiful.
lucky. I'm so lucky. Yeah, me and my husband, I feel like we talked about that every day when we lived in the hospital with her, like how grateful we were to have sold when we did, and to be able to have that flexibility to be with her day in and day out and not think
Hmm.
about anything else, because so few people get that opportunity, and it was huge for us. It was so huge.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit about as much as you want, about
Mhm.
your life as a heart mom and how you're having grown up in the world of healthcare, right? And studied
Yeah.
to become a nurse practitioner helped you and kind of created this new vision and mission that you went on.
What I'll say is that it is a blessing and a beautiful curse at the same time to be a medical provider and be a medical parent. I think a lot with my husband when we were living in the ICU with my daughter, because she had her first heart surgery at just 6 days old, which is still mind breaking to me. I mean,
Hmm.
her heart was so teeny tiny, like she was 7 pounds. But she had 6 surgeries total by the time she was 5 months old. And kind of even having any kind of background knowledge about how a hospital works. Like, my husband used to get so irritated. He was like, why in the world do they wake her up at 5 a.m. to weigh her? Like, what is going on? And I'm like, number one, we are on hospital standard time. We are not on real world time. And number two, they weigh them at 5 a.m. So when the surgeon rolls in at 6 and the team rolls in at 7, the plan is already set by the time they see us at 8. So even kind of having the background fillers is nice, but it was really hard for me to turn off my nurse practitioner brain and reconcile with myself. Like, as a family nurse practitioner, I am trained to know a little bit about a lot of different things so I can get people to the right people and get them to the right specialists. And so I am not a cardiologist, and I don't know a whole ton about congenital heart disease, but I do have the baseline knowledge of like the heart's anatomy and how it works and blood flow and circulation. And so trying to mitigate that gap for me was really hard. And I often tell people, like, it was so much easier in those first few months when Meadow was so sick to just be her nurse practitioner instead of being her mom, because there's always this like piece of me that was holding back, and it was really hard to connect, because we were fortunate in the sense that her first surgery went well enough that we were able to come home for a couple of months in between that and her big surgery to do her full repair. But it was so high risk to bring her home. Like, she was always hooked up to oxygen monitors. We did not leave our home. Like, we had groceries delivered. We couldn't risk anyone getting her sick. We didn't even have family come in. Like, her oxygen at the time, so normal person's oxygen is like 95 to 100. Her oxygen at a baseline was 75, and that was just her. And we were kind of always like on this edge and cliff of like, is today the day that she's going to emergently need surgery? Like, is her patch going to go bad? And so it was endless doctor's appointments. Like, it was so much easier to start compartmentalizing and looking at that objective data. Like, how much does she weigh? How much does she drink today? Like those sorts of things. Than
What's
it
a
was to
job
just
you
like,
knew? You knew how to do
it
that
was the
job.
job I knew. It was absolutely the job I knew. So it was easier, especially when you're like dealing too with so much grief of the reality versus expectations of what being a first time mom looks like. And something that I don't talk about as often, but something I'm kind of grappling with now and coming to terms with now is, even though it was like the highest high of my life to sell that company and like set us up for success and all the things, there's a lot of grief to not own the thing anymore, especially when your name and face is tied up in it. And I think I skipped that grief window because I went right into Meadow stuff.
Sure, that makes sense.
So that's something I'm exploring today, because it is, even if it's something you absolutely want to do and it's absolutely the right decision in the moment, like it is hard to give up control when you're an entrepreneur, especially I think too when you're a female founder. That's like a whole added layer. I am. Meadow, I love to tell people that she's the healthiest she's ever been. She's incredible. She is almost
Great
3
to
years
hear.
old. Yeah, she's so cool. She's so funny. Now I feel like I'm at this unique leverage point because I have this medical expertise, but I also have this like entrepreneurial and business expertise too, which feels irrelevant when it comes to doing advocacy work, but it's actually incredibly helpful when you're looking at like how nonprofits are run and all the things.
Right.
And so I've really kind of moved into a new season where literally earlier just this year, I left behind my previous business. And I'm like, y'all are set up for success without me. It's time for me to kind of figure out what my life looks like and what I'm doing next. And so I've joined the boards of a couple of different congenital heart disease nonprofits, because what most people just have no idea about, and I became a nurse practitioner and had no idea, is that heart defects are the most common birth defect. So it's 1 in 100. Odds are you know someone that has a child with a heart defect, whether you know it or not. And they're also one of the least funded. So I really like it. I've thought a lot about that, because I was like, if it's the most common, how is it the least funded? Like, that doesn't even make sense.
Right.
And people are like so perplexed. But really, it's because there's no big pharma approach to CHD. There's no medications that are going to fix a heart defect. And that really changes the game of how you get funding and what that looks like. And
that does make sense. You're right.
Yeah, we have that, just the awareness it's a problem and people just don't know.
Absolutely. So talk about so you're pulling obviously all of your background,
all the pieces,
education, from your medical background, from being a mom, from your business into advocacy work. What does that feel like for you? Do you believe that's your next true, mission, that you've been set up on this path to be able to go out and do this now? Is that kind of your next North Star?
I think it's part of my next mission. What I struggle with internally is I was like, if I make congenital heart disease my entire identity, then it makes it really easy for Meadow to make her heart defects her entire identity. And that's really the last thing that I want. Like, I want her to feel like a whole person outside of having tetralogy of Fallot and what that looks like. And so, like, of course, that's a huge piece of her story, because she has an artificial heart valve. And so every time she grows exponentially, she outgrows that valve and she has to have open heart surgery again to fix that. So it's not like we're a one and done. People are always like, oh, she's normal now. And I'm like, I mean, yes, but no, it's not that simple. But I appreciate the sentiment. People always want like the brighter side, right? So I think it's definitely a piece of my work. One of the coolest moments of my entire life to date was last summer, we did a $15 million legacy gift to our local children's hospital that saved Meadow's life after her second surgery. And that's the kind of work and the kind of like dreams that I want to be working towards. But I don't necessarily know exactly what's next. But I do think, like, at the end of the day, I sold my business when I was 28. I'm 30 now. I'll be 31 later this year. And I don't think I'm done in the entrepreneurial wheelhouse. So even though I don't know exactly what it is, I do think like there's something else coming. But a lot of things in my life kind of fall at the time they're supposed to. So I don't want to just like rush into the next thing either. Because I'm kind of doing advocacy work because I love it and I feel called to do it. And like I was telling you before we started recording, like I was literally in DC like half of last week for a bill that we got passed last year, which is really cool. Now we're trying to make sure we keep the funding. But that being said, I just don't want that to be the whole thing. That would be a lot for me and my family.
Understood. Based on your experience in the world of healthcare at large, I'm just going to say you've had lots of different ones. What would be your hope for kind of what changes in healthcare or what the future could look like in it? Be it, it could be from a lot of angles. You've had a lot of different moments already.
I think I have two big goals or two big hopes. One, which I think is maybe the more realistic, less loftier goal, is that there's just more mental health transparency across the board, whether that be for patients or providers, because I felt like the world kind of cracked open when I created my business because there were so many people out there, nurse practitioners just like me, who have been shamed for having anxiety, and something that we actually haven't even hit on because my story is just kind of wild, to be honest. I can own that. Is I have obsessive compulsive disorder, but I didn't even find that out until my daughter was born. But obviously, like, that played a factor in how I showed up in school and having that panic attack and all the different things. But because I was shamed for having anxiety, it then became something I stuffed down and tried to stuff and stuff and stuff until I just literally couldn't anymore. So I would love to see more mental health transparency and more resources. And I think sometimes when I say that, people are like, it's kind of cliche, but I'm like, in the least cliche way possible. Like, we just need people to be having these conversations that people feel this way. How can we better work with that? Because if I hadn't stuffed down my anxiety for so long, maybe I would have gotten my diagnosis a bit sooner.
Right.
And then the other side, which is obviously with my heart mom lens, is, the world of congenital heart disease and these children living into adulthood is still relatively new. So it was just 15 years ago that there were more adults living in the United States with congenital heart disease than children. And what that stat actually means is the first time these children were living into adulthood, which is so cool. Like, we've come that far.
Right.
So I definitely think there's a world where my daughter doesn't need to have another open heart surgery, and we're getting closer to that every day. I also think there's a world where maybe there is a cure for CHD. I think that's when people are like, oh, that's way too lofty. But I don't think it's too lofty. Like, I think there's so much to be done, even in just like the prenatal diagnosis. For example, my daughter, she has holes in her heart and pieces that are missing, but she has all 4 chambers. And when you have all 4 chambers of your heart, it's like 50-50 whether you get your heart defect diagnosis or not. So there's a lot of people that find out at birth. I almost found out at birth. Like, it was a fluke thing that I found out ahead of time because I actually had 3 anatomy scans during my pregnancy. And it was on the 3rd that was the first time ever they're like, oh, maybe something is off here. And I was like, what do you mean something is off? Like, I'm in my 3rd trimester. Like, what's happening right now?
We have like 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm like, literally, I'm giving birth tomorrow, it feels like. Like, what do you mean she has a heart defect? 4 heart defects. But that being said, I definitely think we're living on the cusp of medicine with Meadow every day, all day. And I think there's a much different future ahead of us. And I'm very, very, very excited about what that could look like, which is why I love to do advocacy work.
Right. You're keeping it more prominent in everybody's mind, and keeping our eyes on it. Your story, and we're kind of starting to wrap up here. It's beautiful of you to share everything. And I like to kind of jump into some fun things to cap it off.
I love fun.
And one of those is, you're talking about your story, and you obviously went into, healthcare, but also teaching. But let's imagine that neither of those were your ideal career. What would you be if you weren't in healthcare or weren't an advocate or teaching healthcare?
My very first dream and vision for my life was to be a children's book author.
Love that.
And I definitely think that could still happen.
I don't think so too.
Wheelhouse. Yeah,
I think that plays really well into your story.
Yeah, well, especially books about heart defects and those sorts of things. But like I said, I don't want heart defects to be my entire identity. So how do you weigh that out? And I also, what most people don't know about me is I love astrology. It's a side hobby of mine. So I think in a different world, I might be an astrologer.
That's
but
interesting.
very different paths.
Oh, well, I'm sure you, if anyone, are going to figure out how to intermingle those together.
You can be both. You can be a nurse practitioner and you can be an astrologer.
And both
Yeah,
and.
yeah.
That's exactly right. Okay. Do you have any books you would recommend for our listeners?
When I was thinking about this, I had two different ideas. So for people that don't know anything about OCD, and I've met so many people now that just learned they've had it, those sorts of things. There's a book I really love called Turtles All the Way Down by John Green.
Okay.
And I think we get this like very cliched view of what OCD looks like, and it's just hand washing. And that book definitely like mentions that part of it, but there's so many other pieces that I feel like it highlights really well. So it's a nice portrayal.
That's an amazing recommendation. Thank you.
And then the other one that I just always love and always recommend is Untamed by Glennon Doyle. It really got me back into reading a few years ago. And I just, especially, I've talked a couple of times about being a female founder and kind of like the connotations around that too. Like, I really love that for any female listeners to read Untamed.
Amazing. Okay. Those are two great recs. I obviously know the Untamed, but I'm going to have to check out the other one.
Yeah, that Turtles All the Way Down.
Turtle All the Way Down? Is that right?
Yes, okay. Turtles All the Way Down. It's a young adult book, so go into it with that lens. But it doesn't mean it's not good. So.
Right. No, sometimes we need that when we're exploring new topics. Yeah. That's amazing. Well, I want to say thank you very much for joining today. Your story is beautiful and nuanced, and you've done a whole lot of, or you've had a path that is so interesting and ties together, I think, in just a wonderful way, right? Like the hardships turn into to kind of some beautiful resolutions and ways that you've used them to help others. And that's really what we're here to highlight. It's how people have used their health experience in healthcare, be it from being a practitioner to a teacher to an advocate, and you're all of those things wrapped into one. So we really appreciate your time on the podcast today. How can our listeners find you and learn more about you?
I think the easiest spot is probably Instagram. A lot of people, like, they have people run their Instagrams. I run my Instagram. Like, I actually like to talk to people in the DMs. Sure. And that's at Sarah Michelle NP. NP is a nurse practitioner. I also have a website, which is sarahmichelleboes.com. Boes is spelled Boes. And then the last place that I've really kind of hit it off with this year, strangely enough, is LinkedIn. I do lots of writing on LinkedIn because I feel like that's kind of my strong suit. And so I've created a little following there. So if you'd like to see more like storytelling and all the different pieces coming together, LinkedIn's a great place for that.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Shift Change Cares. If you enjoyed this show, please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. You can find us on social media at Shift Change Cares or visit our website at shiftchange.com, where you can access all of our episodes and resources. Know someone with a great story who'd make an excellent guest? Head to shiftchange.com to submit your nomination. Until next time, this is Shift Change Cares, where we explore the heart of healthcare.